All right, everyone, let's get started. So, my name is Xavier. I'm with the Manhattan Borough President's Office Constituent Services Unit. Um, as we are all very well aware, immigration policies on a federal level have been changing, and it has been placing some of our most vulnerable community members in increased states of anxiety. And many people are afraid to go to work. People are afraid to send their children to school. There has been an overall air of anxiety that has been spreading throughout our communities here in the five boroughs and honestly countrywide. So we wanted to take the time to inform our service providers on how we can best serve our communities in a way that's safe and effective, whether it is for employees, partners, or for the community members that we're interacting with. So without talking too much, I will be jumping straight into the presentation in collaboration with CUNY's Clarin program. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session, and I will briefly speak to you about the Constituent Services Unit of the Manhattan Borough President's Office and how we can assist with immigration matters as well as matters beyond that. So I will pass it off to our presenter, and feel free to get started.
The reason why we're all gathered here tonight is to get some tools and to have some resources and gain some knowledge on how we can best know our rights, how we can protect our spaces, our staff, as well as our community members. So let's just see. There we go. So before going into the presentation, I'm obligated to, of course, say that nothing in the presentation should be construed as legal advice, especially when it comes to immigration matters. They are all very unique and case specific. So I urge you, if you or someone you know has an immigration matter that is of concern, please contact an immigration attorney. Sooner rather than later, advanced planning is really the name of the game. At the end of this presentation, we will be providing resources, and I believe the slides will be made available. The resources will be linked and on the page that you'll see towards the end of the presentation. So again, thank you for taking the step to stay informed, be aware, and help your staff and community members stay safe. So here's a brief overview of what I'd like to speak to you about. We're going to start with what is happening in immigration in 2025 under the Trump administration. Basic rights of all persons in the United States, which includes undocumented individuals. What to do if ICE comes to your workplace, to your school, to your home. If ICE approaches you in public. We'll also be talking about traveling within the United States as an immigrant, whether undocumented or documented, and how you can best support your community members and employees. Then we'll be providing those resources that I mentioned, and then finally we'll be turning it over to some questions, hopefully, that we'll be able to get to for all of you. So, as most of you are, I'm sure, aware, what has been happening since President Trump took office? Well, the Trump administration has declared an invasion of our country, and his administration's priority has been to ramp up efforts to stop unlawful immigration. With that, of course, comes greater ICE presence and ICE surveillance in our communities. Why does it matter? Why is it important? Well, they will often enter businesses, schools, and other entities, organizations, sometimes without having proper legal authority, as we've been seeing in the news. Employers and staff members are rightly concerned, oftentimes feeling uncertain about how to respond in a situation like that. So we want to be able to give you some tools, at least, to protect your space and protect your staff and community to the best of your abilities. And knowing your rights is one way to do that. So, as an overview, the US Constitution provides certain basic rights which apply to all people that are on US soil, regardless of immigration status. So, I'll go over them quickly. I'm sure that most of you are already aware. We have, of course, the freedom of speech and religion protected under the First Amendment. We have the protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, which we'll be talking about under the Fourth Amendment, the right to remain silent so that you avoid incriminating yourself under the Fifth Amendment, Under the Sixth Amendment, we have the right to an attorney in criminal cases. I will note, however, that immigration violations are civil in nature, not criminal. So there is no right to an immigration attorney, but an individual can always and should always ask to speak to an immigration attorney that they will then have to procure themselves. It won't be automatically, an immigration attorney won't be given to them through the court process. And then under the 14th Amendment, we have the right to equal protection under the laws and due process before a person can be deprived of their life, liberty, or property. So some concepts, some basic concepts are, in order to detain someone, to stop someone even briefly, ICE needs to have reasonable suspicion, which is a reasonable articulable belief based on specific facts that he or she has, based on their own experience and knowledge, that a person may be in violation of the law. It doesn't suffice to racially profile. It doesn't suffice to hear someone speaking in another language. That does not rise to the level of reasonable suspicion. To make an arrest, ICE agents need, of course, probable cause. And they need probable cause that an individual in the immigration context is removable from the United States, that there is something that makes that person unauthorized to be here and therefore removable or deportable. Um, that requires specific facts, very specific facts or circumstances that would lead a reasonable person to believe that a crime is in fact being committed, um, has been committed, or will be committed in the future. Why is it very important to stay silent? It's important to stay silent because probable cause can sometimes be established just by answering the agent's questions, which may reveal one's immigration status and give the officer reason then to arrest someone that they maybe otherwise would not be able to arrest. It's always important to remain calm and non-combative. Um, and never to run away. The reason for not running is because running itself can create suspicion sometimes and give ICE a reason to detain an individual for further questioning. So we're going to start by talking about what happens if ICE comes to your workplace. And there are a number of reasons why ICE may come to your workplace. They may come for a Form I-9 audit, which many of you may already be familiar with. They may come because they're doing a workplace raid, or they may come because they're there to detain a specific person or individuals. So we'll start with I-9 audits. Form I-9 is the form that is required by every employer to complete with an employee that organization hires. So it is the form that documents that individual's ability to lawfully work in the United States. An I-9 audit is when ICE comes to the place of employment to actually check that the employer is following all of the rules and in compliance with maintaining I-9 records for their employees. The requirements for maintaining I-9 records. Every employer must maintain an I-9 form. Many of you have probably already signed one or many yourself over your lifetime every time you had a job. They're required to be on file for all employees, and they must be kept on file for 3 years after hiring or 1 year after that employee's last day of work, whichever comes later. There's never a need to have the employee fill out a new I-9 if they continue working with you, unless there is a change in their work status. So for example, if someone changes they go from having a work permit, an EAD card, to changing their immigration status that gives them authorization to work incident to their status, or they go from being someone who holds an employment authorization document to then becoming a green card holder. That would be a reason for updating Form I-9. Otherwise, that form does not need to be re-verified or updated. Employers are not required to keep copies of the documents that the employee shows the employer to prove that he or she has authorization to work. They can keep a copy. It is advisable, but they're not required to. But the employer must at least look at those documents and use those documents to be able to verify employment eligibility and authorization. And of course, employers that are not in compliance may face civil as well as criminal fines and penalties. An excellent resource is this handbook for employers. I have the link at the bottom of the screen. I urge you, if this is applicable to you, to please refer to this link in the future, print out the handbook, and have a copy of it in your office with your HR, with your staff. It's really a wonderful guide to have. And this is what Form I-9 looks like. It's the employment eligibility verification form. On the top, the employee fills out basic information about themselves, and where the arrow is pointing, section 2, is where the employer reviews the documents that I mentioned to verify the individual is actually authorized to work. Depending on the kind of document that they present as their identification and proof of being employment authorized, it will be listed in one of the columns below. So what to do if ICE comes to your place of employment for an I-9 audit? ICE generally does notify employers of scheduled I-9 audits in advance. They will issue what's called a notice of inspection. And when this happens, it's always advisable for the employer to get in touch with the immigration attorney, the counsel that that employer works with. If they have one, if they don't, they should get one, to assist them in navigating the I-9 audit. Employers will have 3 working days to produce I-9 forms to government agents. There's no need to provide them early. If you have them, you simply have to show that you're in compliance. And after reviewing the records, ICE may find that some employees may not have authorization, or there may be some technical issue with the form. The employer is then given 10 days to go back to the employees, sort things out, and provide proof of valid work authorization for these employees. If that can't happen, you will be told to terminate those employees. Of course, if you do receive notification that you'll be getting an I-9 audit by ICE, you should be notifying the affected employees. If somebody's paperwork is not in order or ICE finds that they're not authorized to work, certainly you must notify the affected employee. You can always ask for more time, giving your employee a chance to work things out with their immigration attorney if there's something that can be done. And for those workers who belong to a union, you would work with the union to respond to the audit. So we'll turn now to ICE raids. What is an ICE raid? ICE agents may go to a work site, oftentimes without advance notice, to investigate an employer that may be on their radar for some reason or another. These are federal agents. Their uniforms should say police or federal agent or ICE. They are considered federal police. They may carry guns, and oftentimes, they will be working with local police, depending on what part of the country we are in, or agents from other federal agencies who collaborate with them to go on these ICE raids together. I'm sure all of you are aware of recent media coverage that's shown federal agents wearing masks, clashing with the public, going into work establishments, not necessarily showing who they are, purportedly to protect their identities. But of course, this raises a lot of concern for the public and for individuals that are being detained, being questioned by ICE agents, but not knowing who these individuals are who are questioning them when they're not identifying themselves as they're required to under the law. And of course, there are lawsuits pending currently against the Trump administration on various immigration enforcement tactics. So, what to do during a raid? Easier said than done in a stressful situation, but number one is to stay calm as possible, and do not run. There's no need to assist agents. You just need to not interfere with their job, with them getting their job done. There's no need to sort people by their immigration status or country of origin. There needs to be none of that. What you need to pay attention to is if there is a judicial warrant that is shown. If there's not a judicial warrant, which means a warrant that's been signed by a judge, employers do not have to say anything about a particular employee, whether that person is working that day, take the agent to the employee named in the warrant. If it's just an administrative warrant, that doesn't need to happen. You should be keeping employee documents and paperwork in a private space, in an office marked private. ICE will always need a judicial warrant to enter private spaces, with certain exceptions that we'll talk about. So if you are a public facing establishment where people walk in to your establishment is not private, but there are areas of your establishment that are private. There may be back offices, a kitchen, certain areas of your establishment that are private. If they're not already marked as such, I encourage you, have a sign up, have a sign printed, handwrite it if you have to, make a clear delineation of what areas of your business are in fact private. It's to protect you. It's so that there's no opportunity for there to be a question. I didn't know this was a private space, or to be documented at the end of the day if it's captured on video. So video record the interactions. Absolutely, you're allowed to do so. You're allowed to do so in New York. Sometimes rules vary by state on video recording federal officials and law enforcement, but in New York, you're absolutely allowed to. You want to do so from a safe distance, never interfering with the operation, but you want to record as much as you possibly can. If your establishment has camera set up and surveillance footage of the raid is captured, save it. Be sure to save it. Be sure to make sure that your cameras are working and on in case of a raid. If ICE agents stop and question a worker, the best way to have that employee protect their rights is to stay silent and ask for an attorney and to remind them not to say anything. Any information that's given to an officer will absolutely be used against that individual. And then if an arrest does take place, again, continue recording and ask the officer's name, ID, and where they're taking the person. You may want to designate a point person at your establishment to do that. Not everybody needs to speak out, and sometimes that creates a lot of confusion when everybody is speaking at once and there's a lot going on. It would be great to have a plan in place. Speak to your employees, speak to your staff, have a plan and run through that plan with your employees so that they feel prepared to the extent possible. And then be mindful of what's called harboring laws. If you as the employer know that the government is looking for a particular individual, you are not allowed to knowingly help that person avoid arrest. So it's very important that if ICE has an arrest warrant, whether it's judicial or administrative, and they show it to you with that individual person's name on it, if you know that person is there, you may not actively hide that person and help that person avoid arrest. And you also can't move or transport that person from one location to another. So be mindful of that. So, on the topic of warrants, and I'm sure many of you have already seen this, it's been very popular on social media, understanding the difference between the judicial warrant and the administrative warrant. But on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a judicial warrant. It'll look something like this. You'll be able to see the difference because at the top, even if you don't read it all closely, at the top, there will be the name of the court. It will say search and seizure warrant. And at the bottom, you will find the judge's signature, and it will say judge's signature or magistrate's signature. Whereas on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a Department of Homeland Security warrant for arrest of an alien. This is not a search warrant. It's a warrant for arrest. It's issued by an administrative body, agency, the Department of Homeland Security. You'll see where the blue arrow down below, it says signature of, I don't know if you can see it, but if you can't, I'm reading it out loud. It says signature of authorized immigration officer. So that is not a judge's signature. So that is what you'll be looking for. On the very bottom right-hand corner, in tiny letters, it will say the number of a form, because immigration forms are all corresponding to a particular number. So this is what you'll be looking for to be able to know the difference if you're confronted with this type of situation. And what to do after a raid. You'll want to write down while it's still fresh how many agents were present, or have it recorded if somebody videotaped it. How many, how they were dressed, were they armed, and did they make you or your employees feel that they were not free to leave? And if there was any abuse or mistreatment, that should be documented. If the employee works with the union, if a union applies in your specific scenario, you would want to notify the union. And if you do believe that wrongdoing has occurred, there are several things to do. You'd want to contact your immigration attorney or the individual's immigration attorney. They should be contacting, if possible, your local news network to bring attention to this matter and report it to a civil or immigration rights organization. I list some below, like the ACLU, the National Immigration Law Center, and the Immigrant Defense Project, they are all doing amazing work to bring light to these issues. And finally, detaining specific individuals. So ICE may come to your establishment to find a particular person or persons, and while they're there, they may also try to detain or arrest other people. So what you need to remember is, of course, that only judicial warrants are valid, not administrative warrants. If they are inside your space, they may not come into private areas of your space unless they have a judicial warrant. And remember to obtain as much information as you possibly can. Record from a safe distance. I wanted to also note on public buildings, local government offices, and courthouses, no civil arrests, because immigration is civil. No civil arrests may be made inside New York State courthouses without a judicial warrant. This, of course, does not apply to federal courthouses and immigration court. ICE may make arrests in certain areas of local government offices and public buildings, but again, a judicial warrant is required to enter private areas. I believe there are efforts in New York City to have more stringent laws with regard to being able to exclude ICE from entering these locations entirely. That may be difficult to enforce, but as far as I'm aware, the delineation between private spaces still holds. So if, to the extent you're able to make an area private and designated as such, you would do that to have as much protection as you possibly can to ensure that ICE is not going into a space without a warrant, without a judicial warrant. So again, make a plan that works for you and your staff, and train your staff not to talk to ICE agents. They don't need to, and they don't have permission to. They can simply say, I can't give you permission to enter. You must speak with my employer. And it's, of course, important to know your rights, know what we're talking about. Remember the difference between public areas and when ICE can enter and when they can't. Private areas, offices, kitchens, therapy rooms, depending on the type of business that you have, where they're restricted. And again, please remember, to the extent you can, mark areas private for your own protection. After an ICE raid or an I-9 audit, unfortunately, some employees may, of course, face deportation, or they'll be detained and unable to return to work for at least some time. This impacts your business, your bottom line, and it also impacts staff morale. Someone that is detained, this is a useful link that I have here on the screen to be able to try to figure out where they ended up. It's the ICE locator link. That's actually a link from ICE's website, the government website, where you can put in some details about the individual to try to locate where they are, if the ICE agents don't tell you where they're taking them. And you want to try to your best ability to provide support to your staff, to your community in the best way that you can. And if it means providing them with leave until they're able to return, then do that. Remember, that there are federal and state labor laws for prevailing wage. Make sure you're paying your employees prevailing wage. Make sure that you're paying your employees promptly. And let employees know that you're there to support them, that you'd be willing to provide a reference letter if that's something that is applicable in the situation. You might want to consider contributing money to an immigration legal fund to help your employees afford legal services, which are not cheap, or bond if they're eligible in case they do get detained and are eligible for bond, or even to fund some kind of community response to help that affected individual's family just keep food on the table and keep their lights on. Now, I'm going to turn the topic of conversation slightly to the context of what happens when ICE comes to a school. Schools, like churches and hospitals, traditionally they've been considered sensitive locations. And under ICE's own guidelines, they have been respected as such, meaning that immigration enforcement generally is prohibited in these areas. Unfortunately, as of January of this past year, of this year rather, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, rescinded these guidelines. And now the rule, according to them, is to use their discretion as to whether or not they'll enter these locations, these sensitive locations, on a case-by-case basis. I believe there's a court order restricting them from being able to go into churches. But as far as schools and hospitals, that is on a case-by-case discretionary basis. Fortunately, New York has policies protecting the right of every child to be able to attend public school, no matter their immigration status. And New York City public school system has rules in place where they will not ask about a child's immigration status. If they happen to learn of a child's immigration status, they must keep it confidential. And also under federal law, schools are not permitted to disclose information about students or anything in that student's education records that identifies them without the consent of their parent, or if the child is old enough, 18 and over, the consent of the individual student. This applies to undocumented students, and it applies to all educational institutions that receive federal funding. Another really important thing to consider here is that parents who may be at risk of deportation should consider having plans in place for their children. There's so much happening, so many reasons to be anxious, but it's important to plan. And it's important to plan before things happen to the extent possible. This is particularly true for mixed status families, meaning families where there may be undocumented parents and siblings, but other siblings or children are US born and US citizens. So they should be at a minimum updating their child's emergency contact card. Every school maintains a child emergency contact card to know who to contact in case a parent is not reachable to pick up their children from school. Have an individual that they trust listed on that card in case that individual parent is picked up. They might also want to consider seeking legal help to put certain documents in place for guardianship of their children in the very unfortunate event that there is a separation of the child from the parent. So there are some resources I list here, and there are links to them at the end of the presentation. In New York, we have something called standby guardianship and designation of person in parental relationship. You can learn more about those at the link that I will that's provided at the end. In some cases, a document called a power of attorney could be useful as well. In New York, it's different from state to state. In New York, the power of attorney does not confer any kind of guardianship benefit or healthcare decision ability to the individual agent, but it can be useful for giving somebody else authority to manage a person's finances or do something with their property if they need to. So that's another tool that I wanted to highlight. Now, if ICE comes to your home, the home is your sanctuary. It's highly protected under the Constitution against searches and seizures. So ICE needs to have a judicial warrant to enter your home, not an administrative warrant. It needs to be a warrant that's signed by a judge, and the only generally recognized exceptions to this rule are if the owner gives consent, or if there's some kind of urgent circumstance, which is very rare, such as some kind of risk to the public. Um, Otherwise, absolutely no need to open the door. An individual who is confronted with the situation, if ICE agents come to the door and knock on the door, you can demand to see, in as respectful manner as you can, um, try to articulate that you would like to see the judicial warrant. And if they don't have one, you do not have to open the door and let them in. You can say that you want to assert your constitutional rights, and there are know your rights cards available. We have some here. There are many organizations that are providing this kind of tool. You can simply slip it under the door or through the mail slot, asserting your right to remain silent. Or you could simply just read the following statements or say something along these lines: that I do not wish to speak to you or answer your questions or sign anything based on my Fifth Amendment rights. I do not give you permission to enter my home based on my Fourth Amendment rights unless you have a warrant to enter signed by a judge with my name on it. And I do not give you permission to search any of my belongings. If they force themselves in, you still assert your right to remain silent and instruct anyone in your household to do the same. Now, when we talk about ICE approaching individuals in public, the public has traditionally always been viewed as a different domain because there is no reasonable expectation of privacy when you're in public. It's not like when you're in your home. So ICE agents can make an arrest in public spaces if they have a valid arrest warrant. And in this case, it can be either judicial or administrative. And in some cases, they can make a warrantless arrest if they have probable cause, but they must have probable cause that an individual is removable from the United States and is likely to escape before they can go and have time to go and get a warrant. Those are the only circumstances if there's probable cause. Otherwise, in public, they absolutely need a valid arrest warrant. You have the right to remain silent. As always, you don't have to answer any questions about your immigration status, your place of birth, your country of citizenship. This will absolutely be used against you. Um, you are not required to show any identity documents to ICE agents unless you are under arrest. You are also not required to unlock your phone. There are certain privacy concerns, of course, in this digital age. And ICE agents may try to even use certain tactics like waving the phone in front of you to unlock it. Consider disabling the Face ID feature if this is a concern to you. Never sign anything without speaking to an attorney first. Never lie and never produce false documents under any circumstance. If you're not being detained, you have absolutely have the right to ask, am I free to go? To understand what is happening. Ask the officer, am I free to go? And then walk away calmly and silently. If they say no, you have the right to ask why it is you're being detained. Why are they holding you? Why have they stopped you? What is the reason? And let them know that you do not consent to a search. If they see something that may appear to be a weapon, they can pat you down, but they're not permitted to go through your bags or any of your personal belongings. And if they proceed to do that anyway, despite your protest, you still should say out loud that you don't consent to that search. It's always helpful to put this information out there, particularly if others might be recording this event unfolding. You want to vocalize your constitutional rights to not consent to that search. And as I said, if people are recording, great. Try to record as much information as possible, details of the interaction, names, badges, who the agency is performing the arrest. Also, importantly, know what documents you should be carrying with you, no matter your status. On the resources page later on in the presentation, I have a link, a helpful link that will list out all documents in all scenarios, what an individual must carry with them depending on their immigration status. So, for example, U.S. citizens are not required to walk around with their ID, with their proof of citizenship. They don't walk around with their passport or their birth certificate. However, in these times, unfortunately, and if you know you may be in a situation that you may find yourself in an ICE encounter, you may want to consider having proof of your US citizenship on you so that you don't get wrongfully detained and then they figure it out later after you've spent hours needlessly detained, wrongfully and unlawfully detained. Green card holders must, under the law, carry their green cards with them at all times. And if you're undocumented and have been in the US for more than 2 years, it would be a good idea to consider carrying some proof that you've been here, proof of your presence over these last 2 years due to new rules on what's called expedited removal, which is the government's ability now to put people into these expedited removals where they can simply deport individuals quickly to carry out their mission without giving them an opportunity to be before an immigration judge to hear them out, to hear their side of the story and to have their case heard. So that is something to consider for individuals in that situation. I want to point out a lot of clients ask me, I'm concerned about traveling. Is it okay to travel domestically? Should I drive? Should I take a flight? As far as domestic flights are concerned, it's always required to present valid, unexpired photo ID that's been issued by state or federal government. And undocumented individuals have always been able to use some kind of identification, even to be able to travel by air. There's a link here at tsa.gov link that's up on the screen for a complete list of acceptable IDs. But I want to point out that as of May of this year, the real ID compliance rules went into effect. So state issued driver's licenses and IDs that are not real ID compliant are no longer acceptable as valid forms of identification at airports across the United States. So that you need to remember that if you're traveling domestically in the United States, you need to have a real ID compliant ID, or you need to have some kind of acceptable alternative like a passport. Traveling by car. Of course, there are no restrictions. We are free to travel in the United States from one state to another. But some things to be aware of, depending on your immigration situation, is that police in some states, as we know, may cooperate more closely with ICE. And if you are pulled over and you don't have a valid driver's license or ID, police may cooperate and report you to ICE, and you may be arrested or detained on other charges. As we have seen, routine traffic stops can sometimes lead to problems in this regard. And something else to be aware of, depending on where you're traveling in the United States, is that there are laws that are different with respect to what an immigration official has the right to ask you about, depending on where you are traveling in the country. So if you are within 100 miles of the US border, CBP agents are permitted to ask you about your immigration status. As always, undocumented individuals are encouraged to speak to immigration attorneys, to their immigration attorney before traveling, to avoid putting themselves at risk and to understand what the concerns may be in their specific situation. And this applies to anyone that is here as an immigrant who has a concern about traveling. Get advice before you make a decision that could potentially put you at risk. This is a list I wanted to share with you of some personal documents that are always good to have organized and in a safe place in advance of something happening. And this applies to all of us, really, but to the immigrant community in particular. Have your passports, if you have them, valid, meaning with at least 6 months validity. Have things like your national ID cards, if that's applicable to you, and your birth certificates. your marriage certificate and divorce decrees. Have all those documents in one place. Any legal planning documents, like what we mentioned for provisions of taking care of children in the event of a separation, any court orders or immigration documents, social security number, medical information. Have those things in a safe place, keep copies of them, and share a plan with your loved ones. Let them know where they can find these documents in case you're not able to reach them. And also be mindful of what's posted on social media. Under the current administration, there is extreme vetting happening right now. This primarily affects those that are traveling into the United States, that are applying for visas or reentry to the United States. The Department of State is highly vetting social media accounts. But this also applies to people that are here in the United States. So if something is accessed that you post on socials, it can be used against you. And, sometimes people don't think about that. So I wanted to just highlight that as an extra precautionary measure. So a recap, how can you support your community members and your staff, your workforce? Know how to protect your staff at the workplace. Um, keep keep important records and employee documents in a private space, locked if possible, and certainly marked with a sign that says private. And know how to protect students and share resources with their families. Train your staff. Do a dry run. Have a plan in place so that there's less of an opportunity to be surprised, and you can feel empowered and feel ready as you will be to be able to tackle a situation like this if one comes knocking at your door. And encourage staff and community members to organize their personal documents. This brings me to the end of my presentation. So we have some resources here on the screen that I mentioned I would share. Please contact Xavier if you're interested in getting Know Your Rights cards. I know that he's able to share those with you. You can contact him. His email is here on the screen, and he might say something about that at the end of this presentation. What documents you should carry with you that I mentioned. This is a great link that is a resource available from Legal Aid NYC. There are many different wonderful immigration legal service providers that can provide pro bono or low bono representation to individuals, and also really great resources for just finding private immigration attorneys. I will caution you that with all that is happening in immigration in America, it is very hard to find sufficient pro bono immigration attorneys. They are working their hardest, but there just aren't enough of them to go around. So expect that if you have an urgent matter, you may need to find a private immigration attorney and get the advice you need right away. And that's okay. If possible, if you have the ability to do that, I would highly urge you to do that so that you're not waiting. And family preparedness planning and guardianship resources that I mentioned, there are two links here that are applicable in New York State. Please review those and share them with your community members and with your staff. Resources for community-based organizations in particular. These are two really great, really comprehensive resources, one by the ILRC and the other by Legal Aid. Guide for Employers, which I mentioned before, excellent resource, print it, keep it in the office. And if something egregious happens and you want to report ICE activity, even if something not egregious happens and you want to report ICE activity, be aware of the local response units that are available in our communities in New York City. I've listed the New York City government website for the rapid response legal collaborative that New York City has in place. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I thank you so much for sticking with me. These are the Know Your Rights cards that I mentioned Xavier can provide. They're available in English, Spanish, French, and Chinese. A great resource to have and to share with your workforce and with your community members. And thank you. Thank you very much. I think we're going to turn it over to questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was incredibly informative with super important information. And thank you for the attendees for your time and for taking the time to really take in this information to share with your communities and with your workplace. We do have two questions for you. So I'll start with the first one, which is what documents should a DACA recipient carry?
So I'm less familiar with DACA, but it's very important to carry um, any immigration paperwork that they have been given is better than nothing at all. If there is a work authorization card that they have, it is always important to carry some kind of documentation that shows that they're either in process, that they've had status, that they have status. The problem with DACA is there is so much uncertainty as to the future of DACA, as so many of you probably already know. Immigration is not accepting new applications, uh, so that process is on hold for the time being, unfortunately.
Thank you. And an additional question we have regarding harboring and concealing laws, and it looks like the specific legal code is in there for you to review. It goes, does an administrative warrant or a DHS warrant suffice as a process to trigger harboring or just judicial warrants? Or if DHS/ICE agents verbally ask for a specific person but present no warrant at all, is that sufficient to trigger harboring if an organization alerts that person to the presence of DHS?
Well, my understanding of the harboring laws, and I certainly haven't studied them extensively, is that if you're made aware that an individual, that an ICE agent is there to look for an individual person that they name, and that you know that individual is there, you don't have to say anything about that individual being there without having a judicial warrant. But you also may not actively engage in trying to hide that individual. That's what I was trying to explain. I don't know if that was clear, but that is my understanding of the harboring laws. I hope that answered the question.
Great. Thank you so much. So it doesn't look like we have any additional questions at this point. I will use this time now to just quickly emphasize the Know Your Rights cards. Our office does have them available for distribution to anyone. So if you would like a file so that you can manually cut out the cards yourself, whether it be on cardstock paper, or if you would like the cards to be mailed to you professionally printed, feel free to just reach out to my email. I have dropped it in the chat for you all and we will have no problem sending out those cards or the file to you. And then just in general for the Manhattan Borough President's Constituent Services Unit, we provide a wide array of services. We cast a pretty wide net of areas that we can assist with, especially if it deals with city agencies. We do our best to maintain contacts with other city agencies such as HPD, HRA, so if you are ever dealing with any sort of issue navigating these services that are meant for the public or communicating with the city agency, by all means, feel free to reach out to our office for additional support. We may not be always to assist directly with the matter. For example, we aren't always able to assist with immigration related matters, but we can refer you to organizations that do provide free legal assistance regarding immigration. So please use us as a resource. We are here to support you and we want to make our presence known. But with that, thank you so much for joining this workshop. This workshop will be available on our website eventually for review. So feel free to check out our website for additional information as well as recordings of other seminars that we've hosted. Um, Thank you again so much to our presenter for this wonderful information, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day and bear the heat well during this heat wave. Thank you guys so much.